Welcome to Soul Connections, a podcast about enchanting relationships with the human, more than human, and divine. I'm Emily, an astrologer, mystic, and herbalist.
I'm Aryn, an astrologer, writer, and creator.
And I'm Dani, a musician, astro minister, and organizer. We're your hosts. Join us for illuminating conversations with radiant guests and Astro Church sermons that weave astrology, mythology, and tarot.
Journey with us as we make meaning out of mystery through archetypes, patterns, and storytelling.
To everything, there is a season, a time to every purpose under heaven.
Welcome to another episode of Soul Connections. Today is May 16th, and we are at the tail end of Taurus season, and we have another Astro Church sermon for you today. And before we get into that sermon, we'll briefly introduce ourselves and share our big threes and our pronouns. I'm Emily. I use she, her pronouns, and I have a Taurus sun, happy Taurus season, Gemini moon, and Leo rising.
Aryn, my pronouns are they, them. I have a Capricorn sun and rising with a Taurus moon.
And I'm Dani. My pronouns are she with a capital F and they. And I have an Aries sun, a Pisces moon, and a Libra rising. Welcome to another Astro Church sermon. We place Astro Church at the end of the season to reflect on our lived experiences rather than try to predict them. Astro Church is about finding meaning in what we've been through, connecting deeply to the stories that we're living in, and also discovering some magic and hope for the future.
In this episode, we're going to be talking about Taurus season and particularly Venus in Aries, since that is the Venus sign that has ruled over this Taurus season. Our herbal connection is Rose, and our tarot connection is Knight of Pentacles. And we're going to be talking more about the story FernGully as our archetypal connections. So before we get it all into that, though, we like to start with something called universal shoutouts. Before I explain what that is, we're just going to take a big, deep breath together. So finding a comfortable place in where you're sitting or standing or whatever you're doing, maybe rolling your shoulders back a little bit. We're going to inhale through our nose and exhale through our mouths. Let's take one more. Inhale and exhale. So for universal shoutouts, these are who and what that we're holding space for. And you can also, as a listener, send us shoutouts if you visit our Instagram page, Soul Connections Pod. In our link in our bio, we have a little form that you can submit, and we will share those on air. This can be groups of people we don't know, and maybe sometimes people we do know. So something that I've been thinking a lot about is hearing the news about Palestinians not having access to food. And in particular, it's because Israel is blocking aid, food, medicine from getting into that space. So I've just been holding them in my heart and feeling really upset and angry as well, and trying to find ways that I can be supportive and also sort of motivating in my own life of how I can show up for those in my community as well. So that's who I'm thinking about. We're going to send them a universal shout out by taking both of our hands, wiggling our fingers, sending that energy up and out to the folks that we are talking about.
I can go next. Yeah, universal shout outs for me are just a place that, like, when we have agency and we have power, and we'll talk more about that, but there's a lot of things we don't have a lot of power and control over, and it comes from a time of doing prayers for the people in this radical Christian church that I was a part of for a time, the All People's Church. Yeah, that's kind of what this is about. So, in that line, there's a lot of people that are really, really suffering and experiencing extreme violence against them by like fascist, nationalist, imperialist, capitalist patriarchs that rule over all of us. And one of those groups of people are people who are here as immigrants, specifically Black and Brown immigrants. Um, uh, Even people who are on visas or like here on paperwork are documented here in this country, are working towards citizenship. So many of them are being targeted. And I have a coworker who had to flee the US because of that, because even though everything was in order, she was a contributing member. She was one of my best coworkers. Like, we liked having her on the schedule because she was really, really great. But even without any of that, even if she wasn't, like, she was still targeted. And there's a lot of people being targeted right now. So I just want to hold space for all the people who are being targeted and also all the communities that are being so deeply impacted by the loss of their family members and coworkers and people within these communities doing various things. So, universal shout out to them.
Thank you both. Yeah, and I have a universal shout out. For my sister, my baby sister, who is 10 years younger than me. Today is her college graduation. And unfortunately, I could not be there with her in person, but she got to walk across the stage and receive her diploma. And she still has one more year of grad school, but this is such a big time of transition for her, really, being on the cusp of young adulthood. And so really wanted to give a universal shout out to my sister, who is going to be going through massive transitions in the next year or so, and just kind of feeling into, what life is like after you end kind of your schooling. And yeah, just thinking about all the college grads out there. And also, yeah, like the economy's not doing great, and it might be a hard time to kind of find your bearings. So just want to send some love to my sister and other college grads right now.
So we're going to close with a group breath before we get into our story connections. We're going to inhale again through our nose. Big exhale through your mouth. I'm going to hand it over to Emily to share more of our connection today.
Yes. So our story for the month is FernGully, a beloved movie of many, especially fellow millennials. It's an animated movie that came out in 1992. And thank you to Dani for writing up a beautiful synopsis so that I will get to share one of my favorite childhood movies that I had on VHS. Inside an ancient tree, inside a fern-filled gully, fairy tree spirit by the name of Krista sat staring longingly into the jungle. Her grandmother, Maggie, was sharing a story, one Krista had heard many times before. Our world was much larger then, she said. The forest went on forever. We tree spirits nurtured the harmony in all living beings, but our closest friends were the humans. And then, as sometimes happens, the balance of nature shifted. And Hexus, the very spirit of destruction, rose up from the bowels of the earth and rained down his poison. The forest was nearly destroyed. Many lives were lost, and the humans fled in fear, never to return. Most think that they didn't survive. It was only by calling on the magical powers of nature that I was able to trap Hexus inside an enchanted tree and save FernGully, which is why it is so important for you to learn to use these powers. I won't be around forever. Krista, distracted by music and laughter in the distance, clumsily excused herself from her ancestral lessons and flew off to join her friends. Maggie sighed. Krista was a joy-seeking, headstrong, and impatient girl, and she was not ready for the powers that awaited her. She needed to pay attention. She needed to move at a steadier pace. She needed to learn her own agency and take her place tending to the ecosystem of FernGully, protecting all of its creatures and inhabitants from harm. As Krista flew, something shadowy appeared over the mountain. A thick cloud rising, billowing darkness over FernGully, blotting out the life-giving sun. Krista returned to Maggie to ask about the mysterious fog. Smoke, I should think, Maggie replied. What smoke? Krista asked. Oh, there are many things in our world you don't yet know about, Krista. There are worlds within worlds. Everything in our world is connected by the delicate strands of the web of life, which is balanced between forces of creation and forces of destruction. Since the beginning of time, we have been the guardians and the healers of the forest. We have too long forgotten the magic powers of nature. The time has come to call on them again. Remember, all the magic of creation exists within a single tiny seed. Maggie placed a small seed in the center of fertile soil. Help it grow, she instructed, taking Krista's hand and holding it gently over the seed. Krista furrowed her brow and rolled her shoulders, channeling her magic with all of her might. The seed sprouted and shrunk back as quick as it came. Why can't I do it? Krista complained. Maggie smiled. Everyone can call on the magic powers in the web of life. You have to find it in yourself. I will now hand it over to Dani for our tarot connection.
Thank you, Emily. It weaves right into our tarot connection for the day, which is the Knight of Pentacles. I pull our tarot connection from my deck. I let my deck tell me, and I like doing it that way because it always weaves so well into the themes and not even purposefully sometimes. So I just think that's really magical. For me, the Knight of Pentacles is about movement. If you can see here on the left, that is the Rider-Waite image of the Knight of Pentacles. On the right is the Knight of Pentacles from my deck, which is the Fairy Wicca Tarot. I don't think it's in print any longer, but it's my deck I've had forever. And that's the actual physical card that volunteered to be talked about today. As you can see, the Knight is on a horse in the left-hand picture. So there's something around movement. There's something around how we move through something. They tend to be associated with mutable signs in astrology, which also move us from one season into the next. Knights also are of service to something greater. There's an element of chivalry when it comes to a knight. So there's a knight of each suit, 4 suits in the tarot. The Knight of Pentacles is of service to the earth element, the pentacle element. So if you think about, knights, they protect the queen, they serve the queen, they joust for the queen, they go to war for the queen. So the Queen of Pentacles being about abundance and earth and fertility and gentleness and softness, our Knight of Pentacles becomes kind of a gentle warrior figure. Again, it's about movement. So the movement is earthy movement. It's slow, it's steady, it's embodied. It is of service to something. It's of service to the land. It's of service to the body. It's of service to the ecosystem, which ecosystem can be, it's everything. It's all the living beings, including our communities, our societies, how we're structured. The Knight of Pentacles is of service to all of that, and in a slow, steady, gentle way. It's also has to do with, relating with honor and dignity, kind of slow, like the honor and dignity comes with the knight energy of being this warrior for the element. And for the earth element, there's this sense of like duty and honor and dignity that comes with that. Emily reminded me earlier that Lindsay Mack talks about this as the night of pleasure. Like, how can we let pleasure move us and guide us? And that makes so much sense. Again, the Queen of Pentacles being about like fertility and abundance and pleasure, the Knight of Pentacles being of service to that and moving, letting that move them. So very gentle, gentle warrior in service of the natural cycles of life. There's a patient, loyal, honest, and strong energy to the Knight of Pentacles. I asked Aryn, because they kind of have some Knight of Pentacles energy, I asked them if they have any insights that they wanted to share. So Aryn, do you have anything you want to add?
I just want to emphasize the depiction of the Knight of Pentacles and also the Knight of Cups. They are on their horses, but they're stationary. If you look at, and I'm referencing the Rider-Waite Smith like illustrations for Knight of Wands and Knight of Swords, they're like charging forth. And so I think that that's distinct because while Knights are all about movement and action, the Knight of Pentacles is strategically still. And Pentacles, like as somebody who has 60% of my chart is in Earth, I do really relate to the Knight of Pentacles because it is more of an emphasis on, okay, I'm going to move, but where am I going? This needs to be strategic. Like Pentacles does not have time to mess around or for like frivolous pursuits or to like move in a way that's not efficient or systematic with its goal. So I think whenever I get the Knight of Pentacles, that's my cue to be strategic with my movement and connecting it back to what Dani's saying about if the Knight is in service of pleasure and ecosystem balance and fertility and abundance, the Knight is going to be thinking about all of those things as it moves forward. So just I wanted to emphasize and add that because I do think this is where like tarot cards, how the artist decides to depict them can be really important and also pivotal to the ways that we like conceptualize this energy. So yes, slow and steady, which does feel very Taurian.
Well, and I think that's interesting too. You mentioned the stillness, the strategic stillness is what you said, because it's still about movement, but it's how we use movement. It's our strategy around movement. Really interesting. So I appreciate that, Aryn. Thank you. For me, what it feels like when I get it, especially the picture on the right, because that's my Knight of Pentacles. When I see that, I think like slow down, move a little gentler, like take stock of what's going on, of your body, and what's around you. So, Knight of Pentacles. Emily, do you want to take it over for our herbal connection today?
Yes. So the herbal connection for Taurus season is rose, which is beautifully depicted in this graphic here. These are actually pictures that I have taken of many different rose plants over the last couple of years. And then the card that is featured is from my beloved Herbal Astrology Oracle deck. And so rose, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of species of roses all over the world. They are such a globally reaching and globally beloved plant. This plant is so revered by so many cultures and is found in so many myths, so many traditions, so many stories, right? Like rose is a universal symbol of love, universal symbol of romance. And so I think like thinking about this like global reach and resonance of rose kind of speaks to this like web of life that we, very Taurus, like we all are part of the web of life and we are all connected, through our ecosystems. And we are all connected because we live on this beautiful earth together. We share this home, we share this planet. And I think rose is such a beautiful embodiment of that. And so I wanted to share a poem. This is written by Robin Rose Bennett in her book, The Gift of Healing Herbs. And she wrote this poem about rose. Wild blossoms of pink and white, and fragrance that brings delight, sweetening the day and night. Open petals, scratchy thorns, If animal you were born, you'd have soft fur and sharp horns, cooling the liver of fire, relieving the mind of ire. Spirit soars ever higher, waking libido and love, trust in below and above, brings more peace than any dove. Soothing skin and heart as well, making heaven out of hell, ringing like the clearest bell. So I thought that was a cute little poem. And the line in there, if animal you were born, you'd have soft fur and sharp horns. I was thinking of like a Scottish Highland cow, which is like my favorite symbol of Taurus, with the soft, fluffy fur and the sharp horns. So very bull, very Taurus coded there. So rose is such a magnificent plant. Rose is ruled by Venus and the moon and is sacred to the goddess Aphrodite. I would say rose is such an embodiment of the planet Venus. They are one and the same. They are just so delightfully in relationship with, and obviously the sacred relationship between Rose and Aphrodite. You know, anytime I make a Venus altar, there is rose involved in that altar as a sacred offering. Energetically, spiritually, on a physical body level, rose is a heart mender. Rose is a heart opener. Think of that, just those beautiful soft petals, how gorgeous and just soft and open they are. Rose teaches us with their fierce thorns how to establish boundaries so our hearts can be soft, tender, and vulnerable. Rose can uplift our mood and process us in the really hard work of processing grief and heartbreak. And so, Rose can be an ally for anyone who is going through grief, the loss of someone they love, the loss of some being, right? Collective loss. We're experiencing a lot of collective loss right now. Rose can really be who we go to help us process our grief so that we can open and heal our hearts and open our hearts back up to love, and also to remind us that we can set boundaries, because we can't just be open and porous. We need to make sure that we're protecting our beautiful sacred heart spaces. So I think Rose is such a beautiful embodiment of Taurus. And I just wanted to share from my Herb Crafters tarot deck. Rose is the Empress, the major arcana card, and the author of the Herb Crafters Tarot. She writes, "Healing the heart heals the world. Embody sensuality in bold, vibrant ways. Let creativity and abundance flourish around and within you." So feels all very Taurus to me. So thank you so much to Rose for being our herbal connection of the month. And so we are now going to get into a little bit more about the astrology. We are in Taurus season right now. And so I'm going to start us out by rooting us into the Taurus archetype, which is all of the archetypes are so spacious. There's such complexity to all of them. So I'm really excited to dive into this with Taurus, because I was born during Taurus season. I have a Taurus sun. I thrive during Taurus season. I really just love everything about Taurus. So, Taurus is fixed earth, the fixed earth sign, stabilizing, grounding. Seasonally, this puts us in the middle of spring. Taurus is ruled by Venus and is the exaltation of the moon, and Taurus is symbolized by the bull. And I think it's really cool if you start diving into the lore and the myth around bulls, that they're actually like in so many myths, and actually just in cultures, like ancient cultures, sacred bulls have been such a heart of a lot of cultures, which I think is really interesting once you start to get into that. Bulls, I think, really represent like the fecundity, the fertility of Taurus. You need a bull if you are to grow your flock of cattle, and they're very, they can be charging at times. They could be a charging bull. but they're also, very sturdy. They like to graze, they move slow, they love to just munch on grass, but they can be irked and they can be agitated. So you have to be very, very soft and mindful around a bull. So Taurus is as a sign, kind of experiencing Taurus like in your body, or how you experience these archetypes, or even how the season feels. I think just like go outside and like look at what the earth is doing right now. And that really speaks to the archetypes of Taurus. Where I live in Milwaukee right now, everything is flourishing. The flowers are abundant. Like the green has finally come back, has finally returned. Everything is lush and flowering, abundant, beautiful, fertile, just the flowering trees, the green, the leaves, the trees' leaves are finally like fully back, which is such a welcome sight after a very long winter. Taurus roots us into the cycle of life and the cycle of death and rebirth, or the cycle of life and death. And Taurus, like this is very heavily represented by Taurus and the opposite sign Scorpio. And Taurus is really that life and that birth side of the life-death axis. We see it out in nature. Like I was saying, there's baby geese, there's baby bunnies, whatever, animals you have around you, they are reproducing. The trees and the plants are reproducing. Those are the reproductive organs of a plant. I think a flower is so Taurus because flowers magnetize, they attract pollinators. They say, come hither, come enjoy and savor my beauty and my lushness. And I have very sweet nectar for you to eat. And in exchange, you will disperse my pollen so that I can reproduce. So that feels very Taurus. The Venus is about magnetizing and receiving. So Taurus is a time of being so present, rooting into, I really do think of like Nine of Pentacles, that card as well, like rooting into the simple pleasures of just being alive at this time of year, in this fertility and abundance and beauty of spring. Going outside, sitting in a backyard or on a balcony or in a park and just taking in. And if you have a garden, please go sit in your garden and just taking in all of the beauty of this time of year. It is just, I could forever just talk about Taurus season. There's also an element of Taurus that is rooted to work and hard work. If you're a gardener, if you're a farmer, anyone who stewards the land, that this beauty is not just cultivated on its own. It actually takes a lot of hard work. Taurus season, I've been in the garden. I've been doing a lot of hard work to get seedlings in the ground, to tend to them, to prep the bed. There's hard work and there's labor. I think Taurus as an earth sign can speak to labor. So some of the big holidays that happen during Taurus season, we have Beltane. Beltane is the midpoint on May 1st between the spring equinox and the summer solstice. On the same day as Beltane is International Workers' Day, also known as May Day. And this is a holiday that celebrates working class people. This is a holiday that was established back in the late 1800s when workers were fighting for the 8-hour workday. And when that historic victory was finally won, there was this international council of laborers and workers that, again, kind of this global connectivity, this web of life, this web of workers came together and they established International Workers' Day to commemorate this historic victory for working class people. So definitely recommend doing some research and learning more about the roots of that, because it is something that capitalist governments have tried to wash away. Like, I know we celebrate Labor Day in September, and I think that is intentional when actual International Workers' Day is in May. And they put it at the other opposite end of the year. And it's like, no, May Day is when this historic, workers' rights were established. So we also have Mother's Day. We have the US's Mother's Day, and we have Mexican Mother's Day during Taurus season. So I just feel like that speaks to the fertility, birth, motherhood, and just the act, right? Even if you're not a physical mother, anyone energetic and archetype and ways of being can be mothering, which is simply tending to life. anything that you are tending, anything that you are nurturing, anything that you are pouring your love and care into, that is an act of mothering and tending life. So that is very, very Taurus. And then also kind of getting more into, of course, we live in this beautiful planet, and we see Taurus everywhere in the natural world. But we also are humans that live within systems that have been created by humans. And so there's an aspect of Taurus that really speaks to resources, which can be natural resources that come from the earth, how we resource ourselves, how we resource our bodies. And then, of course, there are man-made resources as well, which include our financial systems, currency, exchange, money, right? All related to Venus, the ruler of Taurus. And so we can't ignore, as much as I would love to just sink into the earth and have that be all that Taurus is, we do also are humans that live within these institutions, and we have global free market capitalism as the world order. And what is the heart of global free market capitalism but the New York Stock Exchange? And what is the symbol outside of the New York Stock Exchange? A statue of a charging bull. So as much as I would just like to be like, no, that's not part of Taurus, it is. It is. How we value money. I think Venus so relates to our values. Venus is all about our values, all about our desires. And we live in a system where money is what allows you to acquire your pleasures. Money is the currency and is a major mechanism that allows you to be guided by your pleasure, right? And we also live in this consumerist society, this very shadow side of Taurus, which is we live in a consumerist society where we are sold products day in and day out. And so there is kind of like a stereotype of Taurus to be consumerist and materialist. And I would say that's more about the ecosystem that we're in, which is a consumerist society, than like an individual problem, or that like, I don't think people should be out there being like all Tauruses are materialistic and consumerist, right? And even if there are Tauruses that are, please take that, like, understand that that's because that's what we're swimming in. That's what you see that on your Instagram feed. You see that every time you watch TV, we're always being sold to. We're always being like manipulated to be consumers. So that is no individual's fault. So with Taurus, we get the abundance and the fertility of the earth. We get the rebirth of the earth. We get the rebirth of, just this part of the year. And then we also have financial systems, wealth, shadow side can be hoarding and greed. And then we get the really fixed nature of Taurus, which is dependable and stabilizing. And yes, at times stubborn. It's true. It can happen. Digging in the heels. So that's kind of Taurus. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit about the sun in Taurus. And so I'll bring this back to the earth, but literally think about if you live in the northern hemisphere like we do, the sun, right? We get Beltane is the midpoint between the spring equinox and the summer solstice. And the summer solstice is the longest day of the year. And so Beltane, Taurus season, the sun during this time of year is growing in power. Daylight is becoming much longer than the night. And because the sun is that life energy giving force, we are being infused with more energy this time of year. I know for me, I'm out and I'm biking and I'm socializing and I'm coming out of my winter hermit shell to be out into the world again. And all the life is coming back. And so if you think about sun in Taurus, you can literally think about it, the sun in the sky, wherever you may be at in the world, the power, if you're in the northern hemisphere, the sun is growing and life is coming from that. So I will hand it over to Dani for our connection to Scorpio.
Thank you so much, Emily, for sharing your breakdown of Taurus energy, our resident Taurus sun, perfect person to give us the vast array of archetypes that could be associated with Taurus. So whenever we talk about a sign, Taurus, we also need to talk about its opposite, because our birth charts are a wheel. We look at it as a cycle, as a circle. And so the opposite sign always has influence. And the other reason that is because the moon always, through every solar season, so the sun right now is in Taurus. the moon is moving quicker than the sun, so it will always make an opposition with the sun at a full moon during that solar season. So that's another reason that we talk about the opposite when we talk about a season, is because we're always engaging with that opposite. So in the case of Taurus, the opposite of Taurus is Scorpio, which, as Emily mentioned previously, that is the life-death axis. So Taurus is the life side of it, the birth side of it. Scorpio is in the northern hemisphere, Halloween. It is, when we're releasing things. It's the fall. It's when the leaves are falling into the ground. So, Scorpio has that death side of the axis. And they really work together to make the cycle of nature, right? That's kind of what they rule over. We have fixed earth and fixed water. So they really are about that cycle of nature and the stewardship of it and the process of it and the sitting in it, because they're fixed. So there's an element of like sitting with things and sitting with that cycle and with that part of the process. It's also another Venus and Mars ruled axis, which is interesting because we've talked about that last time about Aries and Libra, but that's a fire air Venus Mars rulership. This is an earth and water Venus Mars rulership, and it makes it relational, but this time it's in fixed signs and in earth and water. Taurus being the life side of the axis. We grow in season. To everything, there is a season. Taurus, it rules that life side. So when it's time to grow, we grow. Taurus is not just indulgent. There is that greed hoarding side of it, but it's really sustaining. That's kind of the whole thing with all fixed signs, is that they're sustaining. Scorpio is also sustaining. There's a sustaining energy to it. So Taurus is a strong and powerful guardian of sustainability, fertility, and that cycle, life's cycles. A deep honoring of natural cycles, the resources and abundance that come from allowing death to happen, right? So there's also work involved, okay? To sustain something, to sit with something. Taurus is a fixed sign. There is work involved in that, and an earth sign. Honestly, all earth signs have to do with work. That they rule our work houses in astrology. So there's something about being steadfast and steady with work. I will say here though that Taurus, I think is cute. A lot of the Tauruses that I know are like, they're hardworking people and like care a lot about work, but also like have a complicated relationship to work because it's uncomfortable sometimes to work. And so there's like a desire for comfort with both Taurus and Scorpio axis. And there's also a discomfort in both the Taurus and Scorpio axis that I think they sit with. Taurus is the hope of spring that we get when we are letting things die at Scorpio season. So, and also, Emily kind of touched on this, and Aryn will talk about this when they talk about Venus and Venus's rulership, but there's this concept of our resources, Taurus being about our resources and Scorpio being about our shared resources and values. So there being this values conversation, and Taurus is about our resources and Scorpio being about like how we all collectively kind of share those resources and what we do with them. There's a truth of living on this planet that we only have what we have. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. That's fact. So we are always co-creating with the same amount of energy present that's always been present. And that to me is what is part of what is so beautiful about creation. In order for some to have more though, others have to let go of something. So this is Taurus Scorpio, okay? In order for something to be created, it must be created from the ashes of something else. That is the Taurus Scorpio axis. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. This is a truth that ancient people have known and been saying over and over and over again. Lindsay Mack says, no one gets out alive, okay? So what Taurus gives us is that life that comes after that dust from the ashes. if Aries is that like phoenix, fiery rising from the ashes, Taurus is that flower that sparks like that. It's really the process of getting it from that like brave tiny sprout to becoming a bloom of some kind. And it's really truly magical and beautiful. So Scorpio is on the other side of that. That's the death side of it. That's composting, the death cycle process. And Scorpio composting all of those nutrients, they create nutrients so that Taurus can take it and make it into something magical. It's magical and beautiful and natural. We have to go through that death cycle process, and Taurus is that the side of it that gets to kind of co-create and create something better. So yeah, that's the Taurus Scorpio axis. Aryn, do you want to talk about Venus?
Yes. Okay. Thank you for all of that. I was like writing down things as y'all were talking that I want to weave back into. I think I was really sitting with Venus, and I was wanting to present it in a way where I'm talking about some of the like archetypal associations that when you learn astrology, this is just like what you learn, and also kind of pushing that a little bit further. So Venus is a very relational planet. In our natal charts, it typically represents how we the kind of energy that we put into our relationships. So it might be our values in friendship and love. It might be the qualities that we're attracted to. I also think in some ways it's the qualities that we embody that attract other people to us too. So Venus is one of those planets where it's about us, but it's also about other people because it's connected to connection and harmony. It also has association with like art and beauty. Venus in your natal chart can speak to what kind of art really like excites you or lights you up. That's always fun to delve into, especially if you're a creative person. And it's also associated with archetypally, in my mind, I think of Empress, the tarot card Empress, because it feels like that's a card that's very connected to creation and fertility and sensuality. This definitely feels like Empress is Venus ruling Taurus. So Venus is the ruler of both Taurus and Libra in traditional astrology. And we can look at how Venus is filtered through both of those signs, which I think is a really fun and exciting thing that we can do because it can manifest in different ways in different contexts. So I also want to say that our perceptions of the planets and signs are shaped by our cultures and our histories. We live in a society that's patriarchal and has been for quite some time. A lot of the origin myths around Venus and a lot of these Greco-Roman deities that we talk about were in patriarchy. So I want to say that, one, because it can help us see the ways Venus is connected. In some ways, I think Venus struggles with the patriarchal connection and connotation and also has been shaped by it. So Venus is often in myth connected to erotic love and beauty and that like fiery connection. I think she's been watered down a little bit, to be honest, because I think of intense erotic desire that is not fitting the sort of idealized, it's also like rooted in white supremacy of like white women, their role is to be weak, demure, supportive figures, lovers, but not really like in intense ways, like lovers as in like I support who my partner is. And to me, like, yes, there is that in Venus because Venus is relational. And also I feel like Venus has a level of intensity that's almost like scary. Like, especially you can look at different myths too. Where in some ways, like, she does have this contention with like her independence and agency and like who are those around her. So a lot of Venus origin stories talk about she was not like a child and grew into adult, like she was born fully formed. So there's this sense of independence, of agency, similar to Athena. It's distinct because not all gods, goddesses had that kind of like birthing experience. And also Venus is known for attraction. And when we think of attraction in patriarchy, attraction is often defined under the male gaze. But like to me, Venus is not an object of desire. Like Venus is an agent of desire. Venus doesn't give a fuck about the male gaze. Like Venus is like bringing in what feels best to them. And sometimes desire is not pretty or neat. Like sometimes desire is like horrible. Like, I mean, just the experience of having a crush can just be like so weird and make me feel like I'm insane. So I also think while Venus does rule over the like hee like flirty and like love and like connection and camaraderie, it's also kind of the intensity of like ache and want and yearning. And sometimes we can't have what we want because other people have agency. So Venus contends with these themes a lot. And I wanted to bring in its contextual, societal, like, we're thinking about these archetypes, inevitably we're going to be influenced by how we learn them and how we perceive things. And I do find it quite annoying that in astrology, in terms of the a deity pantheon, like Venus and the moon are the only like feminine coded. And of course it's like, okay, yeah, the moon of emotion and the moon of love, like those are the only things connected to like women or like feminine experience. Sounds patriarchal to me. Venus is also known as a guardian of sex workers. So again, I think Venus is a really interesting archetype because one, you do have like the loving partner, and also you have like the fiery defender of marginalized people. Like throughout history, the way societies viewed sex workers have shifted, but there were times when like in some ways there was like a sacredness connected to sex and reproduction and pleasure that Venus, I think, is very connected to. And I also think patriarchy wants to divide the Venusian Madonna whore kind of vibe. So I think like Venus is like negotiating, figuring out how do I fit within these archetypes that in some ways limit the full scope of her complexity. And I would even go so far to say that like Venus would be a goddess that I would associate with like kink dynamics, because kink is always about negotiating boundaries, which Emily and Dani are bringing up in terms of the Scorpio Taurus axis, as well as this is what feels good to me, what feels good to you. How do we make this like mutually beneficial? Like Venus is always concerned with mutuality, reciprocation, and you need healthy, stable boundaries for that not to go in the way of being unhealthy or self-abandoning. So I was thinking, if we were to divide archetypes into Taurus and Libra, these are the things that I came up with. So through Libra, which is a cardinal air sign, I thought of Venus as the lover, and the lover as in the tarot card definition of the lover, where the lover isn't just there to support you because they want you to. The lover is a conscious choice. So Venus as the lover is not somebody who's like, yeah, sure, like I'll just go with what you want. It's like, no, I am choosing you. We are in this together. So that kind of like partnership where there's agency of both partners and they're making that active choice to be together. I also think as Venus as the artist signified through Libra, especially also in the realms of like ideas, like artists are creating things, and maybe the artist who's like physically creating is more Taurus coded, but also like there's plenty of artists that might not make things with their hands. Like for example, writers per se are like, well, I don't know. Writers, that's kind of like hard because they can make books, but still like the artist in the sense where the artist is trying to connect disparate pieces. Venus to me feels like a poet because it's like bringing in things that might not go together, but finding harmony, finding connection between those things. And lastly, I see Venus through Libra as the judge. Literally, justice is connected to Libra in the tarot deck. So this idea of Venus filtered through an air sign is the ideas, justice and ideas. I think Venus is present in systems of abuse. So Venus is like, to me, an archetype we can call upon to sort of stoke desire to fight for justice for all. And I'll talk more about that with Venus in Aries in particular. In terms of Taurus, how Venus can manifest through Taurian, earth sign, fixed kind of qualities, I think of the gardener. I mean, Emily talked a lot about how the gardener is a cultivator of beauty, but that takes a lot of work and steady commitment and also faith that what you're doing is going to lead to abundance. You know, as you're tending a garden and planting the seeds, you have to trust that cycle that it's going to happen with the right kinds of care. I also think of Venus connected to the maiden, very spring Taurian vibes. The maiden being an archetype where it's youthful, it's has a lot of ideas, it's bursting with energy. I think of the maiden as like somebody frolicking in a field, maybe running towards their friends or their lovers for a picnic. That very like youthful, vivacious energy where you want to connect, you want to know more about people, you want to love up on people. And then lastly, I think of Taurus as very grounded, but also very spiritual. And I think Venus is a spiritual planet because we're all interconnected. Like that whole idea of interconnectivity between all living beings, even beings that are not living, like rocks and stuff, that feels very Taurian Venusian to me. So there's a sense of like groundedness though too, where it's like I am part of this earth and I'm connected to all of these things. And also Taurus is connected to the Hierophant card in tarot, which is a spiritual leader in some ways, especially connected to tradition. So those are sort of archetypally how I'm seeing Venus. But then we have Venus in Aries, like ruling this Taurus season. And so to me, Venus in Aries, we talked about this in our Aries season a little bit, that's disrupting a lot of these patriarchal associations with like what femininity is or what it should be or what is seen as like valuable, because Venus is in detriment in Aries. And that's because Mars is the traditional ruler of Aries, and that is not aligned with what Venus is typically most comfortable or well resourced in. So when Venus is in Aries, it's a little bit uncomfortable because the sort of lush, abundant resources they might have in like Venus and Taurus or Venus and Libra, it's just not as present. And so it has to be more dynamic. It has to maybe make concessions or compromises. And so I think I've come up with two sort of ways to frame this: balanced versus unbalanced, because any sign, any planet in astrology will all have its shadow and light side. And when you go too far in either direction, it's not as effective because it's not balanced. So I see when Venus in Aries is balanced, this might show up as the freedom fighter, somebody who is upset with what's happening and wants to stand up and fight for justice. Again, Venus is connected to justice, and how Aries is going to go after justice might be more in your face, speaking out, a little bit disruptive to the social fabric of things. But then I also think Venus and Aries, it's not disrupting for the sake of disrupting. It's disrupting harmful systems that break apart connectivity and advocating for ones that have more symbiotic relationships. I also think about like a current event that's been happening. Harvard was one of the universities that is not complying with Trump's administration orders around DEI. To me, that feels so Venus and Aries, because while so many other colleges are just complaining, they're just like doing whatever is told to them, Harvard is like, nope. And that feels very Venus and Aries to me. And lastly, I do think that Venus in Aries is archetypal energy of advocating for reproductive justice, addressing like sexual and gender violence. I feel like, again, connecting Venus back to her archetypal ruling of sex workers, of women, of people who have certain experiences that are suppressed by patriarchy. Those are the balanced expressions that I'm seeing this energy manifest in or as. And then lastly, the unbalanced expression. You can have the biased judge. Venus in a judge ruling kind of thing is archetypal, but we know there are judges out there who have bias, who have agendas, who might not be operating in that impartial expectation that the system like says it has. You might also have the person who prioritizes the few over the collective. So Aries is a more I don't want to say like it can be self-centered, but not self-centered is in the sense that, oh, like I'm the only person in this planet. Like Aries is really important for our personal agency. And in some ways, our individuality is valuable. This is taking it like way too far, where it says, I don't care about anybody else. I'm prioritizing me and the people around me. And we do see that kind of energy, unfortunately, in our government. And also, I think because Aries is connected to Mars and Mars is connected to war and fighting and disrupting, I do think that Venus and Aries in an unbalanced way can manifest as violence to marginalized people, a sense of injustice, or even this like sort of immature assumptions about huge groups of people that where it's like these sort of not accurate descriptions. And so those are balanced and unbalanced, as well as Venusian archetypes through the different rulings. So now we're going to read the vibes. We're going to read the charts.
Yeah. And, thank you, Aryn, for that coverage of Venus and Aries. We talk about Venus in case this wasn't clear, because Venus is the ruler of Taurus, which is where the sun has been for the last month. And so Venus in Aries is in Aries right now. It just went through a retrograde. It's, back in Aries. It's direct. It's going forward. It's gonna leave very soon, you know, but that's been ruling over this Taurus season. So that's part of why we talk about that. But we've already talked a lot about Venus and Aries. Like we talked a lot Venus and Aries last episode because it was a big piece of Aries season. And now we've been kind of reworking how we do this section of things. So we're going to focus on just a few other transits other than Venus and Aries. But I think maybe now that we have the chart up, we can point out Venus just to show where she is and and their rulership over this season. There it is. There Venus is. Cool. Specifically today, though, we're going to talk about Mars opposite Pluto, which happened earlier in the season. This is from the full moon in Scorpio, which is later in the season, but we will talk about that Mars opposite Pluto that happened earlier on in the season. We also are going to talk about Uranus in Taurus, if you want to point that out. And that has been in Taurus for the last 7 years-ish and is about to leave. It's at the very end of Taurus right now. And we're going to have a conjunction with the sun this weekend. So that's another one we're going to talk about. And then the last one we're going to talk about, which is what this chart is showing you, is the full moon in Scorpio. So Aryn, do you want to talk about Mars opposite Pluto?
Yeah, so I believe that we had an exact Mars opposite Pluto a few days before the Taurus new moon. So this is like at the beginning of the season. The Taurus new moon had a little bit of that energy still, because when planets make oppositions, there's usually like an exact, so they'll be at the same degree but in opposite signs, and then it will slowly kind of move away, but you still feel that energy a little bit. And Mars and Pluto is not an energy that's like subtle at all. So like we're still feeling that. And also because we had a full moon in Scorpio, it's like Mars and Pluto are Scorpios, both traditional and modern rulers, so it's very present. To me, I think of this energy as very activating, and it can be activating in a lot of different ways. On a personal level, we might feel the sense of power struggles. You know, obviously we're in a society where there's a lot of power inequity and struggles. And so this transit could definitely illustrate the personal, which I think is signified by Mars, because Mars is a personal planet, and also the collective, or I don't want to say impersonal because that's not the right word, but Pluto represents more larger groups of people because Pluto is a generational planet. It takes a really long time for it to move. So whenever I see personal planets such as Mars making strong aspects to generational planets, it's almost like these little windows where individually we feel things that other people are feeling collectively. In our story, which we'll talk more a little bit about later, I thought that one of the characters, Zach, we don't talk about him in like when we mention the story, but he's a character that gets shrunk by Krista the fairy. She's trying to save him from literally getting hit by a tree, and he ends up being like tiny and really small, and he gets to see the perspective of the fairies, and he realizes that the work he was doing for this logger company was harmful. So that's like a Mars Pluto opposition where he's like, oh my gosh, I've been perpetuating this whole time without realizing the impact of my actions. And I think, again, we're having a lot of those feelings. I know personally for me, I'm thinking a lot about like, what is my role in this decomposing of unhealthy, not useful things? Because that's what Pluto is doing. And because Pluto's in Aquarius, it's really bringing forward holes in our collective psyche. It's bringing forward where we need to change things or shift things, or is this no longer useful? It's time to like get rid of it, go back into that earth or that life and death cycle that Emily and Dani have been touching on between the Scorpio and Taurus axis. And we're seeing within just this last month really heightened power struggles. We're hearing a lot of news about ICE arrests, ICE targeting people, also ICE getting access to sensitive documents. I just saw a quite disturbing video where they're now requesting, or sorry, they're getting information from people booking their flights. Again, with all these things happening, we're not newscasters, so we encourage you to like do your own research to understand these, but we want to bring in that these are things that are happening that do reflect the relationship in these planets. There's also like, I don't know, the borders are Barbie. I actually didn't know about that until y'all brought that to my attention, but I did some research and it is really interesting to see. In some ways, I think maybe Mars and Pluto opposition is coming out where you have either agents of this regime or you have disruptors. And so we are seeing kind of a face off between those two things. And even this theme of there are some people who decide to align with oppressors to gain their own sense of power. Archetypally, if you look at many stories, we know that eventually, like, that is not always the best choice because, like, the systems that are recruiting people to do this, like, they don't care about those people's well-beings. So to me, there is a little bit of that tension. And also, I mentioned earlier the starvation of Gaza. Unfortunately, a lot of what we're seeing in terms of Israel and the US aligning and sort of seeing and like acting together through policy, you see that they're supporting really shady, disruptive, horrible things. And so I think in terms of the energy, I would just encourage all of us to not only sit with it, but find ways to move through it because this is not energy that feels good to really wallow in. And in some ways, Mars requires a level of action. And Mars is now in Leo too. So there's like I want to do something about this and also like realize that there's limits to our power and our personal like agency. And so I do think the Mars in Leo urge to want to like get up and try to do something as an individual, but then Pluto's also like, babe, you need to act and you need to be with other people. You can't, not one of us will not save the whole world. Like that's just not we're taught stories like that, but that's just not really the truth in my opinion, at least transformational change. So I'll pause there. There's
Yeah,
lots to
that's
unpack.
so. Can I just jump in on that too? Because I think that's such a key piece of this is like these are really big energies. This Mars, that's the warrior. Pluto is the god of the underworld, the death planet, also the god of wealth, interestingly enough. So there's this really strong face off and like power struggle energy. And also that it being in Leo and Aquarius, it has to do with like individual versus collective. And so for me, whenever a Pluto transit happens, it's like, again, Mars and Pluto rule Scorpio. I talked earlier about it being uncomfortable, like super uncomfortable. But in moving through that discomfort, you do start to understand where your power isn't, but also where your power is and like where you actually do have agency. And so I think that's what's something that's really interesting about this transit is like, is kind of grounding into the reality, which is horrific. And also at the same time, like letting that motivate you to like really embody where you have power to do something about it. And it being in, a Leo Aquarius, also like our collective structures are like broader groups and organizations and networks and the way that we like relate to one another as being a piece of the strategy and how we use our power and where we find our power and where our resources are because we're in Taurus season, so we're talking about resources. And so yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there because it can easily feel, it can make this kind of a transit, Pluto opposite Mars, can really make us feel powerless. And I actually think the opposite can be found from that. Emily,
Thank
do you
you.
want to talk about Uranus or do you have anything you want to add about this?
No, I'll jump in with Uranus and Taurus. So, yeah, really reflect on how these bigger, like why we really like to share these transits and these archetypes is like this can really kind of show up in like our individual experiences and then, of course, in our collective and societal experiences. And so, another kind of one of those planetary energies this is again on another longer term scale, not as long as Pluto, but significant enough, like 5 to 6 years of how this like planet in this sign represents like some of the shifts we're going through and the disruptions. So this is Uranus and Taurus, and I'll point it out in the chart. This is Uranus right here next to the sun. So this weekend, the tail end of Taurus season, there will be a Sun-Uranus conjunction. So this will be really amplified. This will be amplified on a personal level and really on a collective level. And we're already seeing it. I think when the sun comes into a sign, it really illuminates, it provides clarity. And so, Uranus has been in Taurus since 2019. This has been happening. And now the sun is coming in and we're really getting like almost like a clearer look. There's more visibility on the global stage, maybe even in our personal lives, how these disruptions are happening. So we did talk about Uranus as the breaker of chains. That's something that Dani said during our Aquarius Astro Church. So I really like thinking about Uranus as the breaker of chains. How are they disrupting and causing change through disruption, through, breaking things up, causing sudden things to happen? So in Taurus, the earth sign, of course, this is legitimate, like, and literal environmental disruption, hurricanes, droughts, floods, 1,000-year floods that we are having happen all the time now.
Viruses.
Viruses, yes. Right, pandemics, like these are like planetary wide environmental shifts and changes that we are now having to grapple with and live through in this Pluto and Aquarius era. And so some of the things, also remember Taurus is about, I really think about Taurus being ruled by Venus, right? And so it's the earthy expression, the very tangible, the very practical, the very embodied reflection of Venus. And if Venus is our values, what are we valuing tangibly and materially? And there's a definition of like, I think what we value also speaks to like wealth. What is our definition of wealth? What makes us feel wealthy as a society? And so the definition of wealth that I like to work with was written in my Herb Crafter's Tarot deck by Letitia Guthrie. She wrote about the earth element and how the Herb Crafter defines wealth as the health and sustainability of her community and the earth. And I was like, that is wealth. That is like the health and sustainability of our communities and of the earth. Like, that is such a potent definition to me. And unfortunately, in a capitalist society, money is what is valued, right? Which is also very Taurian. That's exchange, that's currency. So we get financial systems. And so with Uranus and Taurus, if you are living in the United States, right now they are working on our federal government, our members of Congress that we have elected to represent us in Washington, D.C., they are negotiating a reconciliation package, which is to fund the federal government. And I really like where we funnel, like that's going to dictate where we funnel and channel our resources, our taxpayer dollars, how that is being distributed across the entire country, right? That's what the budget does. It provides money, it provides resources, and we're seeing all of these constrictions. Healthcare is on the line. If these, Trump has introduced what is called like a skinny budget, where they're trying to cut, right? They're trying to restrict access to resources. And this is a very Uranus and Taurus thing. It's happening very quickly. It will destabilize many things if this funding is restricted that is going to resources and programs that people rely on to feed their bodies and nourish themselves. So right now, healthcare is on the line. If these If this budget is approved as it stands right now, 8 million people will lose access to Medicaid across the entire country. That is right. Healthcare is on the line. I know our friend Rox, who is a farmer, right? Like new farmers and, get grants from the federal government that have completely been cut. And so I think all of this rapidly happening on this timeline, obviously Trump putting up tariffs between and starting like a trade war. So the goods that we exchange with other countries, the prices are skyrocketing and it's getting harder for that flow of currency and goods to happen. So those are just several of the things that's happening with Uranus and Taurus. And then that's kind of like the global like macrocosm that maybe we don't have so much control over, that we're kind of having to grapple with this terrain, which is a very, yeah, Uranus and Taurus, like it's like we're living through a global earthquake is what it feels like. And then you have to figure out, and we're also seeing a rise in resistance. And that is important to name. People are fighting back. People are coming together. This threat to healthcare access in the United States, like this has caused people to rise up, right? Everyday people, because we all need access to healthcare. So I'll pause there. Dani or Aryn, anything you would add for Uranus and Taurus?
I just want to say that Uranus itself is not like the planets shift and change. And as astrologers, we have to make connections between an event and what is happening. I think that Uranus and Taurus doesn't have to be this way, but because we live in a society that does not allow people to have access and control over their resources, we see that Uranus and Taurus exposes that. So it's not to say that like Uranus and Taurus is causing these disruptions. It's how we experience it in the context of our systems. And I think in a lot of ways, what Emily, you were saying about the resistance and people rising up is that this becomes now an opportunity, like in destabilizing times, especially when we don't have control over things like policy directly, at least. People are creative and they're like, wait, how do I fill in those gaps? This isn't sustainable. Remember, like Dani or Emily, you're talking about sustainability is so important with Taurus. And so I just wanted to mention that too. Because if we lived in a society where like everybody had healthcare and like we didn't have wealth inequity, we would experience Uranus and Taurus in perhaps very different ways.
Yeah. And I mean, I do think there's a disruptor energy with Uranus in general, but there's also an inventive energy with Uranus. And that's something that I think, especially with Pluto in Aquarius, which in modern astrology, Uranus rules over Aquarius. And there's a collective resistance, invention of how to do things differently while we're navigating this destabilizing terrain. And maybe there's a need for the destabilization to shake the earth up a little bit, because as Emily talked about specifically, the Taurus's association with both the beautiful lush earth that we come from and also the resource. It's about resources of our earth, and those resources are connected to our financial resources, the resources that we collectively value in this world. And when there's hoarding of that, and there's that grounding down in a kind of a greedy way, as we see in our world, as you just mentioned, Aryn, the destabilization is actually good for it. It's like shaking it up. And, we get to be inventive then as a collective. We get to learn about, again, where's our power? Where isn't it? And like mutual aid is a Uranus and Taurus thing, like collective land back stuff, Uranus and Taurus thing. Union, like the rise of unions again, is a Uranus and Taurus thing. So I just want to say that. Can I talk about the full moon? Okay. So the Scorpio full moon happened on May 12th. And this is the chart for that full moon. And whenever we talk about a full moon, we are talking about the moon being opposite of the sun. So the sun has been in Taurus, as we've been talking about, and the moon on May 12th was opposite of that sun in Scorpio. So I talked earlier about the Taurus-Scorpio axis, how it's the life-death axis, and it's an earth-water axis. It's a fixed sign axis. So essentially, it's that ashes to ashes energy, dust to dust. What goes up must come down. For me, Emily said this in our planning conversation, that because it's earth and water, this is a felt axis. It's like embodied, felt in the body, because water has to do with our emotions. Earth is the physical realm. So we feel this axis in our body. So for me, it really felt intense. It felt necessary, but intense. Again, this is a fixed axis. There is, as I said, a little bit of stubbornness to this axis, but it's in a earthly, physical, and also like emotional way. And it's the life death cycle. So it's letting something go, and grief is associated with Scorpio energy, letting something flow through the body and feel it through the body in order to let it compost into something new. So I feel like for me, not just on May 12th, but especially the days following the moon as well, I feel like I purged some things, like emotionally, composted some things. I feel much more prepared than I did before now, but it was really hard. Like I had to feel it. I didn't want to feel it, but I had to let everything flow through me that was arising, and honestly let some things, specifically like beliefs and things like that. For me, it was my, first and seventh houses, but for all of us, we might have felt this in different ways of, there's something that is kind of being composted right now. And part of that for me is like acceptance of the world around me and acceptance of the circumstances in order to find my agency in it. And I really, really did feel that this Scorpio full moon energy. But I had to feel everything. I had to let everything flow through me, let the things die that needed to die, let the things rest that needed to rest. Part of why I'm an Aries, so part of why I don't want to feel that stuff is not because I don't want to feel it, it's because of the time it takes to process through and the energy it takes. And so sometimes around full moons like this, it can feel really tiring. People can get really tired, exhausted, maybe a little cranky sometimes. So there could be some of that energy going about. Anybody want to, I have something else to say about this axis that I want to lead into our chart of the day. But does anybody have anything else they want to say about the full moon in Scorpio specifically, that how they felt? Okay. So the biggest thing with patriarchal, imperialist, colonialist capitalism that is problematic, to me, like one of the base things, and the thing that we can get out of this Taurus season, and even this Taurus-Scorpio axis really brings it out, is this idea of never-ending wealth. Like I can just earn and earn and earn, and I can just get more and more and more, and it will never end, right? I said earlier, energy cannot be created or destroyed. What we have, what exists is what exists. So this idea of unending wealth goes completely against nature. This life-death cycle involves attending, and there's some profiting, but there's also planning. Like we get to have the flowers sprout in the spring. We get to experience the beauty. We are hopeful for that new life, but we have to tend to it. We have to relate. Emily talks about Venus as being about relating. We are relating to the earth and to the world around us in order to cultivate that abundance. Okay. So this idea of unending wealth, it's not in right relationship to nature. Okay. So when we relate with honor and dignity and a steadfastness in our connections, when we honor boundaries and limits, like our earth has boundaries, it has limits. When we take what is ours and leave some for others, right? Or we, nurture and cultivate so that others may also benefit, or that future us can benefit, right? There's a tending to that. And so there's a need to honor the death cycle, the letting go, the not taking too much. So this idea of unending wealth is really significantly one of the beliefs that is the problem. Okay. If we take and take and take and take with no consequences and no concern for the natural cycles of life, death, fertility, and letting go, that's when we get hexes. That's when we get what we're seeing with the administration right now. And we get this just ugly, yucky, very ridiculous clown copy of like the worst parts of everything. Okay. It's like, everyone's like, how can they be so evil? It's like, because they literally are hexes. Okay. They literally are just evil destruction incarnate, because we've let it get to this point. We've just taken. I'm not saying we personally, because I think we all are in this ecosystem together. I'd say we as like a collective, as humanity, and it's mostly like white patriarchal capitalism, and there's specific people profiting from that. So I just want to say that too. So if we need to relate with gratitude and respect. And white supremacist capitalist patriarchy does not relate with gratitude or respect. It teaches us to relate with disdain, entitlement, and also shame. That's a really big piece of it. So not just with each other, but with every aspect of our world. So people are just take and keep on taking. We're exploiting our resources instead of distributing them and being in right relationship with resources, no matter the consequences for anyone else. So we were talking, and Emily was like, well, it's interesting because the very Karl Marx has a Taurus stellium in his chart. If you think about Marx, everything about Marx screams Taurus energy, screams this life-death axis, this honoring of cycles. He literally has like scientific socialism. It's about honoring the natural cycles that exist amongst human beings and seeing human social structure as natural cycle in a similar way, and the natural progression in a similar way to animals, structures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He also understood the value of work, of labor, and labor creates all wealth is the key to Marxist philosophy, and his entire philosophy was based on that. So we wanted to look at Karl Marx's chart, not for any specific reason. But he was a Taurus, it's an easy connection to make.
That he has Saturn in Pisces.
Heavenly Saturn return. Happy heavenly Saturn return to Karl Marx.
It's really cool to look at people's charts when they're no longer with us, because we get to like analyze their entire like life. And I feel like obviously Karl Marx is known for his philosophies and like his perspectives of the world. And there's this quote that he has too that I really love, and I think highlights this Scorpio Taurus axis. Is he says, the less you are, the more you have. And it's in this quote where he's like, you know, to me, I'm interpreting it as like money is meant to be spent in the sense of it adds more to our lives. And he's positioning people who are hoarding, people who are keeping that as like not being engaged with life, or like being like lesser. And so it reminds me of this idea that the more you like hoard, the less opportunities you have to actually be in relation with all these like forces. And it's actually a really interesting idea to postulate that the more you have, the less you are, because we are taught, and the context is like, the more you have, the more you acquire. Like, that's what you're supposed to do. That's what you were put on this earth to do. And it's just such a radical, cool idea. And of course, he would think that as a Taurus stellium born around a new moon in Taurus, this idea that like Taurus wants to experience things in the central body. I feel like for me as a Taurus moon, part of what I want to nurture is that. And so there are times when I'm like, oh, I shouldn't spend this on this. But then I'm like, okay, but that iced latte is actually going to make me feel so good in my body. And so it's not to the point of consume to like hide or to avoid or to like consume so we don't have to feel our feelings. He's thinking and framing consumption as like fulfilling to the self, not like the overconsumption, but like we're all nourished by things. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Pleasure driven. The Venus, it's not just any stellium, okay? It is both the sun and the moon, okay? So that's the south. It's also the north node, okay? So that's super interesting, which means there's an eclipse somewhere around here. And Venus, which rules over Taurus and is about value and all of the things that we've been talking about. So it's a really quite the beautiful stellium here in Taurus that Karl Marx has in his chart.
Yeah, solar eclipse in Taurus.
It's like literally like, here you go, world. This is something, you know, like it would be really awesome to get Jesus's birth chart. You know what I mean? Like it's like that kind of a thing. Like those people like that like impact things in such a big way, you know, philosophers and idea makers and stuff like that. Labor creates all wealth. I mean, that's the whole point.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about how it's like a fourth house, like Taurus stellium. So like how foundational Marx's teachings and worldview are to so many contemporary political ideologies, political strategies, political movements, even like, yeah, like just it's such a doctrine to so many. And yeah, just how those ideas can be such a foundation. I'm thinking of like a foundation of one's yeah, like political strategy, how they view in changing, you know, the paradigm that we're in politically, socially, that really. And just yeah, I'm thinking about being born on an eclipse. An eclipse is really signifying these really macrocosmic energies and shifts and changes, almost like a little bit Uranus in nature. And like on a collective level, those can be felt. And then, yeah, when someone is born into that energy or through that energy, that's very potent.
Well, also Uranus is conjunct the midheaven in Sagittarius, which has like ideological leader energy to me, you know, and revolutionary ideological leader. But I was also thinking when you were talking about being foundational, and I mentioned Jesus too, like there's all this misunderstanding of Marx's teachings because of the way that it's been used to challenge the capitalist patriarchal order over the years. And so there's a lot of misunderstanding about what Marx is. Like people think of Marx as like a really, you know, like Hitler, you know what I mean? Like they think of Marx as like that kind of energy which is like authoritarian and blah, 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 blah. And like really all Marx, just to clear this up, like, and this is like where we're coming from when we're talking about this, is all Marx was saying is that where you spend your days and your physical energy and your bodily energy, your mental energy, your work, your job, where you labor, like that is hugely valuable. Okay. And it deserves to be valued. And the people in power who benefit from your labor know that. They know how valuable it is. And that's why they interrupt things and blah, 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 blah. So that's why they don't like Marx, is because they believe in Marx. They actually believe what Marx taught. They believe that your labor is valuable, and they don't want you to know how valuable your labor is. And they also don't want you to have the strategies to be able to join with other people who have valuable labor to offer to make changes or do different things. And I was thinking about how impactful Marx is, not just in the people that agree with Marx or like show how they agree with Marx in their policy decisions, but also how impactful Marx is on the opponents of Marx, or the people who state that they're opponents of Marx, and they want to make Marxism a scary thing. And I think it's interesting that in Pisces, it's a loose like 10-degree orb thing, but there's this little grouping in Pisces with Saturn, the sign of authority and tradition and structure, with Chiron and Pluto. And Chiron and Pluto are right together. So there's this like wounded healer energy. There's like Pluto, like the truth, getting to the truth of something, the power structure of a thing. And then this like Saturn, like authority figure, you know. And again, Pisces is Jupiter ruled, similar to that Sagittarius midheaven Uranus thing going on, which has this like belief systems, paradigms affecting the like thought structures, you know, stories.
Yeah, I feel like what you're saying, Dani, that connection where he's also making the connection where he's like, whoever has the most resources and wealth also have intellectual control in some ways. And like, he's a philosopher, like he's like a writer, and he has like, he's an idea person, but then it's that rooted Taurian. And it's so cool to see his Scorpio Taurus axis, nodal axis, because I have that too, but it's the opposite. I was looking at kind of like some of his quotes that he said. And he literally said in Critique of Hegel's Philosophy of the Right, to be radical is to grasp things by the root. Like, is that not just like North Node, South Node, Scorpio, Taurus to be like, he's like, no, I'm digging up the roots and I'm grasping it. And I'm like, I don't know, just that understanding of penetrating all of this, like what has been told, what has been taught, to get to the root. Also, his South Node in Scorpio is ruled by Mars in Cancer, which we've talked a lot about in previous episodes, of being, you know, a challenging placement for Cancer, but also a magical placement too. Because to me, like, I see that Mars in Cancer, and I know Emily has that signature too in your chart, of just being like somebody who's like very concerned with caring for other people and like notices injustices and abuses of that.
In the house of hard labor,
Yeah.
like care work, like, yeah, just very much working class, like the emotional, physical labor. Yeah, very clear.
Anybody have anything else to add about Marx's chart? Maybe we should do a series where we interview dead people via their chart.
Yes.
I love that.
Cool. Well, let's move on to talking a little more about FernGully. So I want to start with Maggie. If you haven't seen FernGully, we just did the preliminary part of it. We don't want to ruin it for you, but there's it's on several streaming services. So please, it's only a little over an hour long. It's a wonderful, wonderful movie. If you haven't seen it, please go ahead and watch it. The quotes that Emily was reading are directly, for the most part, directly from the movie. And they're mostly from Maggie, who is this Earth Elder archetype for Krista, the heroine. Maggie's wise. She's attuned to the cycles. She's a devoted steward of the land. And Krista is that Venus and Aries archetype, a little bit eager, quick, kind of unseasoned to the wisdom of the earth. So Magi is concerned with the cycles. She's paying attention to the ecosystem, to the how the cycles are tended to and sustained and maintained. And one of those cycles is the ancestral cycle. So Magi does kind of represent this like human element of that physical life death cycle, where she knows that her time is going to be up soon. She's going to need to pass down her ancient ecological wisdom before her time is up. And ultimately, I don't want to spoil it, but just know that this is the truth, that she knows she wants to pass down her wisdom. So this is tradition, tending to what sustains us. Also, I was thinking about Magi being associated with Rose, as Emily was talking to. Like, she sets boundaries with Krista. She's like, you need to work at it. You have to find the magic within yourself. Like, you can do it though, like, but you have to practice, you have to tend. So she's firm yet loving. She also is like holding a lot of space for the grief that Krista has about never knowing humans. There's like this ancestral grief about that relationship and how that relationship was damaged. And so she's very like focused on like this firm, loving hand to like help Krista grow, and also to honor the like natural cycles of life and death, and ancestry and stewardship of the land and passing down that wisdom. Aryn, do you want to talk about how it connects to Uranus and Taurus?
Yeah. So in the story, it's interesting because humans in this story, like, we get the origin of they used to be in right relationship with fairies and then also not. So we get to see the two sides of that, which I do think is really impactful because that's just true. Like, that's just part of it. But I think that we have a little bit of Mars energy here represented by Hexus, which is this, it's like a spirit, and the spirit is released again into the world. And we see this like embodiment of destruction. And again, we've been talking a lot about how like destruction is not inherently bad, right? It's part of the cycle. But when you disconnect it from the cycle, that's when it's destructive, but not in a productive way. Going back to our interview with Rocks, like, it's not fertile death, it's death. And that's it. Like, it's stopping the cycle. And so we see tension between the fairies living their little life, and ultimately their forest is threatened by humans doing logging. And yeah, the movie definitely feels like it's very aware of its ecological agenda of being like even at the end it says for our children and our children's children. So the people who made this movie are thinking about these things and thinking about the ways that humans have existed with nature in both productive stewardship, but also destructive and just like completely oblivious. And we get to see through Zach, a character that I referenced earlier, he is a human who gets shrunk to fairy size. And so his journey and his revelation is really interesting to me. And I think it does speak to this like Uranus and Taurus energy where he was just complicit in it. But then he didn't really understand the consequences until he had this experience. And that's when he shifted. And that's when he's like, oh, I need to go back and be innovative. And he's embodying that Uranus and Taurus kind of energy. But it's because he was radicalized by seeing others' experience from their perspective. And so I do think this, when we talk about like right relationship, part of that involves like being uncomfortable with what we've been taught. Like, there's actually a scene where Zach has to confront his role in the destruction of the forest, and he feels shame and guilt, but also at the same time he realizes through that like he has a responsibility and he needs to do something about it, because he does have a choice to stay with the fairies. Like, he could have just like done that, but he's like, no, I have to go back, like I have to do this, whatever. So I do think what we see in this movie very strong archetypal embodiments, and we see both the harmful destructive aspects that Uranus or even Mars can represent, but then we also see becoming advocates for the land, fighting back against that kind of energy. So that was like to me that was the something that I've really been sitting with after watching that movie, is that that there's a way through the grief and the heartbreak, and that there's a way to like reclaim agency, and to like, you can always decide to be in right relation. It's never too late.
So well said. Yes. I'm just thinking about how all the topics are weaving together now, like everything we've been discussing, Taurus, Venus, FernGully. And so in the movie, Maggie has a quote about how all of the magic of creation is contained within one seed. And to me, that is just like, oh my God, makes me want to cry. It's like so beautiful and it's so deeply rooted in Taurus, and just our relationship with the earth and that rebirth and that life part of the cycle. And we've talked so much about cycles, and the cycle begins with a seed. You know, the seed is an ending and the beginning, because when a plant goes to seed, they then die off, right? That's that Taurus-Scorpio axis. When a plant like it has gone to flower to fruit, seed is the last thing that plant will produce. And then it will wither and decompose back into the soil. So the seed as creation, that is a death and a beginning, which we've been talking a lot about today. And then another really strong message in the movie and the story, and in these archetypes, Venus, Taurus, is that everything is connected. Everything is we are all in a web of relations. We all live in ecosystems. Our actions, our behaviors are influenced by all the beings we are in relationship to around us, and they are impacted by us. We are connected. We are tethered. And I think Taurus, with ruled by Venus, and especially Venus in Taurus, really embodies the delicate balance and harmony of the web of relations, and that there is this cycle, this undercurrent of death and rebirth, or being eaten and becoming food, but we are all connected. And I think that is what Maggie is really trying to pass on to Krista, is like, we really have to learn to be in rhythm and to revere these cycles, revere this web of life, learn about the web of life, learn about the rhythms, and then how do we fit ourselves harmoniously within that instead of extracting and exploiting. We really have to learn. I feel like we just keep referencing rocks because I'm thinking about her interview talking about humans finding their role in ecosystems and in the web of life. That is what we have a duty and a responsibility to do, just like Maggie, just like Krista. And Krista, she's figuring it out, right? You know, really, I like that Aries kind of energy to her. She's new, she's figuring it out, she's young, but eventually she does. And so can we all.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it also connects strongly to the Knight of Pentacles energy too, of like Krista has to help it grow, you know, she has to take stock, take time, like, and even Zach's journey, as Aryn mentioned, is also a kind of a Knight of Pentacles journey of like needing to like accept what is and ground down and stay still for a moment and feel what is embodied and kind of grow and understand the slow process of growth. You know, these are fixed signs we're dealing with. There's work that's involved. There's intention and small acts of care over time to create that beauty and bloom and abundance. And to me, that connects to what I mentioned earlier, the quote, "To everything there is a season." You know, Krista had to take up the role of steward because Maggie was not going to be around forever. And so Krista had to learn and to study with Maggie and had to struggle through the discomfort of that because, you know, we can't always focus, you know, especially when we're in, you know, hear music and laughter in the distance. We want to go play. It's hard to focus. And we're not just going to naturally, you know, fix everything, be good at everything, save the day, blah, blah, blah. Like there's work that's involved in that. There's relationship building that's involved in that. It takes time, it takes effort, and there's timing that is involved in that. So to everything, there is a season. Krista had to be ready to take up that role as steward. And just like in nature, we as a collective move through cycles. Part of the reason Hexus came about was because human beings were going against the cycles of nature. And so Hexus became this like all-consuming destructive force that was just released upon everything. Whereas that destructive force could be channeled in a more cyclical way, to trust in the rhythm of the seasons, not forcing the bloom, but like faithfully tending the soil where it is most fertile. I think that's another piece of it. And also, I think that FernGully, this is going to be really cheesy, but I don't care. FernGully does teach us that life does find a way, that there is life that comes from it. And that is Taurus energy. Like, that is what it's about. Life is here. We get to have the springtime. The winter's come and gone, you know? So, yeah, great movie choice, Emily. Do you want to do our personal reflections?
Yes, I was gonna say that movie like came to me like weeks in advance. I just was like FernGully. So I appreciate that Aryn and Dani were down to filter that into Taurus, and it was just such a perfect fit. So, and shout out to Aryn who watched it for the first time last night. Universal shout out to that. Yeah, if you haven't seen the movie, it's a good one. So, our personal reflections to weave this all together, to leave you with, to reflect upon, to journal about, to discuss with a friend. What is your role in the ecosystem of your community and the land around you? What seeds are you being asked to nurture? Where are you being invited to remember your agency? What wounds need tending? Where would better boundaries help me open to more connection and pleasure? And how can I let pleasure be my guide? Thank you so much. This has been our Taurus season Astro Church sermon. Thank you for being here with us. Until next time. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Soul Connections. To support the show, please share this episode with a friend and give us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts.
This podcast is an act of community co-creation with artwork designed by Bree Legan and original music written, produced, and performed by Sophia Mock, Queen Bonobo, Liv LaFlove, and Danielle Renee.
To connect with us or a guest, visit the links in the show notes. Until next time.